Okay, welcome back. We now get to our education portion of today's event. And we get to hear, as I said earlier, from a speaker about her own journey with schizophrenia as well as homelessness. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a Q&A session, so please feel free to ask any question to Bethany. And if you're online, please just put your question in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to get to all of the questions today. I've checked with Bethany, and as she said, she's an open book and willing to talk about anything, so thank you, Bethany, for your openness. So Bethany Yeiser, she's here in front, and she is our keynote speaker today. Now, we first heard about Bethany on TED Talks, and can I just tell you, when we heard Bethany speak, we were just, I don't know where this woman is, but we need to find her, and we need to get her here, because everything that she talked about is everything that BCSS stands for. Bethany is an amazing young woman. She is the president of the CURES Foundation. CURES stands for Comprehensive Understanding via Research and Education into Schizophrenia. She's a motivational speaker. She speaks multiple places, multiple times a year. She's also an author. She's the author of Mind Estranged, My Journey from Schizophrenia and Homelessness to Recovery. She holds a molecular biology degree from the University of Cincinnati with honors. She's a scholarship winner, she's a researcher, she's also a very accomplished pianist, or violinist rather, and she speaks Mandarin. Which is very impressive. Bethany also became ill and homeless while in her senior year of college in 2003. Bethany currently writes a blog called Recovery Road for psychologytoday.com, a very reputable organization. Her second book, Awakenings, Stories of Recovery and Emergence from Schizophrenia, was released this year. I told you she's an amazing young woman. And in her spare time, as I mentioned, she performs, she public speaks, and I'm just so glad that she's in Vancouver with us today. So without further ado, please welcome Bethany to the stage.
Schizophrenia Society, and this is a real pleasure and an honor. Thank you also for that very generous introduction. I'm not sure I deserved it. So my name is Bethany Yeiser, and I am fully recovered from schizophrenia. What does that mean? I have meaningful work again. I have a passion, writing and speaking and managing the CURES Foundation. I'm very busy. I also have a wonderful social life. I'm very close to many people in the Cincinnati area, my parents, my church. This was such a contrast from when I was in the depths of schizophrenia, totally isolated, refusing to see anyone. My full recovery was marked by graduation from college, writing 2 books, thriving. But this was not supposed to happen. When I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2007, within maybe 48 hours, my doctor told my parents that I was permanently and totally disabled. He told them to lower their expectations. He told them I would not go back to school or work or live independently. Fortunately, this doctor was very wrong. Fortunately, I would meet a doctor in 2008 who was passionate about my recovery, who was willing to use cutting edge and underutilized medications, do whatever was necessary to get me better. So today I'm going to take you on this journey from a loving, wonderful home and a scholarship winner at the University of Southern California, which is my first university, doing research, playing violin, working as concertmaster of their community orchestra, and then falling so far losing my scholarship, dropping out of school, becoming homeless in the LA area, losing everything, and then, if you will, the miracle of recovery. Finding the right medication, which did not happen overnight, but finding the right med and getting a brand new start at life. We're going to discuss the need for never giving up, proactive treatment, and we're going to discuss the dire need for organizations like the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society. So here we go. I am a recovered bearcat. Bearcat is the mascot of the University of Cincinnati. Very proud of that. I was homeless for 4 years to the day, believe it or not. I'll talk about this today. At first, I was hiding libraries, lounges, carrying changes of light clothing with me, an expert at washing up in public bathrooms and finding food to eat in garbage cans in the middle of the night, which was my big secret. This was really impossible that I would fall this far, but then another impossible thing happened, my recovery, my graduation. I transferred to the University of Cincinnati and finished magna cum laude in 2011. When I had finished school, I didn't know really what was next. I was interested in doing research. But my doctor, Henry Nasrallah, said, hey, why don't you just write down everything that's happened? So that became Mind is Strange, my journey from schizophrenia and homelessness to recovery. Mental illness. Anybody want to tell me how many people are mentally ill? Let's say 1 out of 10. Maybe you guys are, I'm preaching to the choir. Maybe everybody knows the answer. Okay, so we're looking at about 1 out of 5. Of course, this is a huge spectrum. Some people may need to chat with a counselor, and then there's my treatment-resistant schizophrenia on the other end. Schizophrenia is a lot less common. The statistic I usually use is about 1.1. And one of the things that's amazed me over the years is how this is true all over the world. I remember reading about the delusions and hallucinations a young Kenyan woman had. She had grown up in rural Kenya, very poor. Her upbringing could not have been more different than mine. But her hallucinations and delusions were so similar. So this is an illness that can affect anyone. I remember talking to Phaedra last night, and she said that one of the numbers she'd seen that was very reputable was 1.8. So we're looking at about 1 to 2%. We probably all know, and not just all of us, but people in society, we probably all know somebody who has schizophrenia. You may know somebody with schizophrenia who does not disclose their schizophrenia because they're living in recovery, but they feel that you won't understand. As I said at the very beginning, I'm very happy to be here. When I was recovering in 2007 from schizophrenia, which involves 12 months trying 5 different atypical antipsychotics, I wish I had had access to a support group like the ones offered through the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society. I wish I had access to the educational resources that you are so proud to provide. All right, just a little bit more about me. Beautiful, happy childhood. Midwestern American middle-class family. Dad was a pastor, mom was a year and a half younger. I've had people ask me before, what trauma did you go through that caused your schizophrenia? And in my case, my doctors believed that schizophrenia was just encoded in my DNA, that no matter what choices I made in life, I was going to develop schizophrenia. So my parents didn't do anything wrong. I can't remember one difficult, heated argument with my parents at any time in my life. We had a 2-story treehouse Dad built for us. We were cool. Dad got us a go-kart. My dream was to study molecular biology at the college level. I was interested especially in HIV and cancer. That's me with mom and dad right before I left for USC on scholarship. We were very close, very loving. My parents, they did everything for me as I was growing up. My violins were really expensive. They paid for that. They were so excited about my future and happy for me as I went off to USC. So I was at USC for some time doing research. And then with time, over 2 to 3 years, I started to want to make this worldwide impact. And at first, I was doing research with this biochemistry professor, and he'd won a couple $1 million from the National Institute of Health. And he used to say, if I do this experiment that leads to that experiment, I'll win a Nobel Peace Prize. So here I am in the lab working till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning every night because I want to be part of a Nobel Prize winning effort, right? It was about my second year at USC where it started to sink in that that was not going to happen. This is prodromal schizophrenia. This is that phase prior to the first psychotic episode where a young person is changing. But there's no way to tell if this is normal or if this is going to spiral into full-blown schizophrenia. My third year of college, 9/11 happened, and I started to think, can I do something to change the world? Well, right about that time, my church decided to send a team of young women to China. We were going to be in one of the most poor rural areas of the whole country. And I was very, very excited to get my passport, to prepare. I will say though, as I was getting ready to go to China, my grades were really starting to drop. It was very out of character for me. I'd always done very well in school. Anyway, so I make it to Kunming, China. We're not there for the excellent artwork and the good food. We're there to see poverty. I remember thinking to myself, can I help 1 million people living in poverty in China? Well, okay, so what's the answer to that realistically, right? Okay, if you want to help 1 million people living in China, you need to study Chinese. Probably for a long time, you need to live in China. How about a PhD in something like political science or economics or history, right? Then you might not make a big difference, reach 1 million people, but you may make a significant impact. That's reality. That was not me. I thought I can reach millions of people living in China, and I thought to myself, I know I can do this now. I got back from China. I was on fire to go to Africa. I remember I got my passport to spend my summer in Kenya, and I made it there. That's me in front of actually a Rwandan counselor in front of an organization called Beacon of Hope. I was in Africa for 2 months. I made wonderful friends. I enjoyed the culture. And unfortunately, I came back to the United States with severe reverse culture shock. I could not get rid of my guilt for having a refrigerator. I had a whole closet of clothing. I had access to whatever takeout food I wanted. And all of a sudden, I find that I cannot move on. I remember I was flying back to Los Angeles from Kenya. I stopped in Washington, D.C. to visit an uncle. He phoned my parents and said, something is wrong with Bethany. She's talking too fast. She seems agitated. She can't focus. He said, something is wrong. I'm sure my parents were concerned, but they thought, we know Bethany. Anyway, I remember I was taking my first exam of the semester. This was my senior year of college. And I thought, gosh, I just aced that exam. That was so easy. And I thought, I'm back. Because before I'd gone to Africa, I had gotten some very high grades in difficult classes. I got the exam back. I failed it. No wonder it was easy, right? I had essentially written gibberish for all the answers. My mind was like this cloud, like this repeating record going back to Africa again and again and again, and I could not move on. So since I wanted to change the world and become the next Mother Teresa, I thought I needed to travel again. So I decided I'd go to Thailand this time, where I knew some American missionaries. I told my parents I was going to Thailand, and I also told them I hoped to bring 6 people with me. And I also told them I planned to sell a valuable viola I owned, they had bought for me, to fund the trip. Okay, this raised some major red flags with my parents. They were confused, they didn't understand what happened to my molecular biology dreams, and they said, you know, if you go to Thailand, we really shouldn't be funding USC anymore. You got to cancel the trip. And I thought, my trip to Thailand is ordained by God. You know, I thought, my parents opposed this trip, my parents are evil. And I thought to myself, I will never speak with them again, ever. I would speak with them again, but not really for 4.5 years. So I broke with my parents. I wouldn't give them my phone number when I got a cell phone. I made it to Thailand. If you don't believe me, we got my passport stamp right there. My host family, of course, was extremely concerned. They saw I was not well, but they didn't know what to do beyond contacting my parents, who would not speak with me. So I get back from Thailand. You know, what's next? Well, of course I need to travel again. So I decide I'm going to Saudi Arabia as a single American Christian female. Brilliant, right? Thanks be to God, some laws had changed. I couldn't get a visa. So I got one to Egypt. Close enough, right? I'll just go there. Anyway, on March 3rd of 2003, I had a dream. I was still living in the USC dorm, even though I was failing classes. And I dreamed that my parents had come and they were going to force me to go back to school, and I wouldn't make my worldwide impact. So I decided that day to get on a plane. I couldn't afford to go to Egypt. I had actually maxed out my credit cards in Thailand. But I could afford to go to Boston, and I got itinerary to Cairo through Boston. I remember flying across the United States that day in order to meet an imaginary person in Boston who I thought would change my life, and I wondered if he would even possibly marry me. I was envisioning a man. Oops, yikes, sorry. I remember getting to Boston, and surprise, surprise, nobody was there waiting for me. Nobody had had a dream and knew that I was going to be there. This was the start of my homelessness. I realized I had to either get into a homeless shelter in Boston or fly back to LA. And this is when I became homeless in the LA area. I thought I was 1 in a million. I thought nobody was quite like me. I did not know that in the LA area, only tens of thousands of people were very much like me, struggling with delusions and other symptoms of schizophrenia. Why didn't the police pick me up? Well, if you are not a danger to yourself, others, or gravely disabled, they are not coming. What if I was 75 years old and I decided to be homeless? What if I was 15 years old and decided to be homeless? We would call the police. We would get me help. We would get me medication and food and shelter. But unfortunately, this is a double standard, and this is not the way we take care of our people with schizophrenia. Quickly, you all know the answer to this. Schizophrenia is a treatable brain disorder involving primarily surge in dopamine, a surge in serotonin, and many people with schizophrenia having delusions and hallucinations choose to be homeless. This is not people who are emotionally weak. This is not an excuse. This is an illness. Anybody know who this is? John Nash, yeah. Russell Crowe plays him in A Beautiful Mind. Nobel Prize winning mathematicians, anything is possible for a person with schizophrenia. And of course, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder, these are brain disorders too. Bipolar, at least in the United States, often considered a little bit sexy. You're creative, you're motivated. You know, I remember reading about Susan Cahalan. She wrote the book Brain on Fire, and she diagnosed herself as bipolar and was very proud of it. This is not a casserole illness. When I was hospitalized for schizophrenia, nobody brought me balloons, cards, stuffed animals, and food. I had one person, aside from my parents, visit me. And I remember she looked at me like I was a very strange animal. Unfortunately, we treat our people with schizophrenia differently than people with other illnesses. My hallucinations started 3 years into my homelessness. It was actually January 28th of 2006. I remember I started to hear this chorus of voices in my mind. I was having visual hallucinations. I looked in the mirror, my face was distorted and grotesque. I was taking a shower at a friend's apartment, and there were these 3 guys looking through the window at me. It was so irritating. So I got out of the shower to see these 3 guys. There was no window. So it took a while before I realized that those guys actually were not there. I will say this, though. I am grateful that I never had suicidal ideation with my schizophrenia, because 4 out of 10 people with schizophrenia attempt suicide and 1 out of 10 succeed, which is a huge problem. Another problem in schizophrenia, as you all know, is this anosognosia. This is more than denial. This is like a person having a stroke, they have a paralyzed leg, and they say, oh, my leg's fine. More than denial, no idea. And when I started hearing these voices, I thought, gosh, is something wrong with me? And then I thought, wait a minute here. I don't have mental illness. I'm too strong. I'm too smart. I'm too ordinary. That can't happen to me. As you might imagine, spending all my time in USC libraries and lounges was not a good idea. And it was 3.5 years before somebody at USC called the police. I had been looking for garbage to eat. I was wandering around the campus dirty. I was even in this lounge area that was a nice lounge for people picking up their diplomas. And again, I became a statistic. In the United States, more than half of people with schizophrenia have been incarcerated at least twice. I am one of them. And don't let anyone fool you. Jails and prisons in the United States can be barbaric. They really can. A solitary confinement, I was not in solitude. Lack of natural light, very crowded conditions. I was scared. During my first time in jail, I had never been afraid of the dark before, and it was scary to me. So this was a difficult experience. My other incarceration, I was sleeping in a churchyard at that time. I spent my last 13 months sleeping in the churchyard. Some police called out to me, asked me who I was, and briefly took me to jail. And this isn't just an American problem. In Canada as well, it is much easier to land in jail than it is to get a hospital bed. A lot of people argue, we shouldn't involuntarily commit people with schizophrenia. They have human rights. That makes a lot of sense, but this is the thing. These people who you refuse to involuntarily commit commonly end up in jail, which is probably going to be worse than the worst state hospital. So you have to understand the whole picture, and we have to get our people with severe mental illness off the streets and out of jail. Come on, there we go. So I was finally picked up on March 3rd of 2007. It was quite a day. They told me I was going to start on risperidone. I told them I was not going to start on risperidone. When I was on risperidone, the delusions, visual hallucinations, and paranoia disappeared. I was doing remarkably better, and I thought nothing had changed. And they released me because I was doing so much better. And then the side effects of the medication showed up, this restlessness, voracious appetite, sleeping 16 to 18 hours a night. So I did the logical thing. I went off my risperidone, and the delusions and hallucinations were back after about 2 weeks. And this led me to break a violin in an acutely psychotic episode. My violin, my treasure, it was worth thousands of dollars. It was worth more than that to me sentimentally. Fortunately, during the second hospitalization, the doctor sat down with me and said, "Do you want to go back to school? Do you want to live independently?" He said, "This might be possible." And then he told me something so important. If you go off your antipsychotic and on it again, it can be less effective. This leads to disability. If there is anything I would tell a patient with first episode psychosis, that is what it would be. Again, I needed to learn. Schizophrenia was not a sign that I was weak or eccentric. There's dopamine, I believe. Yeah, that's dopamine. Other chemicals in the brain are implicated. This is much more complicated than we used to imagine it was. Tell your relatives and loved ones with schizophrenia that this is a brain disorder. There should be no hesitation to get help. There should be no hesitation, as with any chronic illness, diabetes, cancer, because schizophrenia is physical too. These are my parents. We made it through 12 months trying 5 different atypicals. I thought my first 3 doctors were right. I thought I was permanently and totally disabled, but they would not give up. And I finally, after 12 months, I found one that worked great for me. For me, it was a medication called clozapine. I think everybody should be a little bit familiar with clozapines. For treatment-resistant patients in the United States, 1 out of 3 qualify, 1 out of 20 get it. Very underutilized. There's clozophobia, people who are afraid of it. If you or your loved one or your friend has schizophrenia, learn a little bit about clozapine for treatment resistance. Strengthening families together. I wish I had had access to this when I came home to Ohio to recover at my parents' home following my disaster in Los Angeles. I remember I was seeing a counselor, and she used to ask all these pressing questions. Why are you not in touch with your family for 4.5 years? And she didn't understand that this was just the illness. I would not be where I am today without my family. Absolutely important. One-on-one support. Cures Foundation actually has a mentoring program for caregivers. I'm really proud of that program. We serve about 215 mentees. But it's also been my pleasure and my honor over many years to offer one-on-one personal support to so many people struggling with schizophrenia, encouraging them, what do you want in life? Do you want to go back to school? Do you want to work? Do you want to live independently? Do you want to just volunteer? Do you want to volunteer at the local animal shelter, you know? We need to make goals, never give up, and shoot to get as close to a person's baseline as we possibly can and never give up, always being proactive. I hope to be a role model, and I'm sure many of you today are role models to people with schizophrenia, to other caregivers, and I thank you for that. And as I end, this is the Cures Foundation, comprehensive understanding via research and education to schizophrenia. We do serve people in Canada, and we do highlight what we call schizophrenia survivors. These are people who are doing amazingly well. I've been told over many years, oh, you know, you recovered, so you're the exception to the rule, or maybe you never had schizophrenia, which is a bit ridiculous. So a few months ago, Dr. Nasrallah and I published Awakenings, Stories of Emergence and Recovery from Schizophrenia. There's 28 stories featured in Awakenings. I wanted to prove that I am not the only one. People do recover, do get better today. I will also briefly say cannabis. Educate yourself, because at least in the United States, we're seeing a severe uptake of cases of psychosis, which very much may be linked to cannabis use. So educate yourself and understand the risks. Again, I'm very proud of all of you and what you do. I like the Yes to Me scholarship, offering $2,000 to your students. I remember how wonderful it was to go back to school after so many years of illness. Look Again podcast, really worth checking out. So I would like to close here. I got better because I met Dr. Nasrallah. Dr. Nasrallah researched me. He knew about me playing the violin, winning a scholarship, publishing papers in biochemistry. He made it his mission to never give up. My parents were the same. And I know that so many of your loved ones will be motivated to always try cutting edge, underutilized medications, always shoot for the best life possible, and never give up. Thank you so much for what you do.
Okay, well, you're thinking of questions. We have.
We had one.
Oh, did we already have? We already have a question from the floor. Okay,
Who is first?
Please go ahead. Here, I'm just going to run the microphone over. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I need to run the microphone over. I'm going to get my exercise here.
If I may know, are you still taking clozapine?
Am I still taking clozapine? Is that the question? Yes, I am. I started clozapine in 2008. I've never missed it, and the hope is to be on it for the rest of my life. Even if other newer medications come along, I've been so stable and so well on clozapine, I hope to never go off of it. Mm-hmm. And this is the way these antipsychotics commonly are. It's a little bit like a person with diabetes taking insulin. You don't get to a point where you just say, oh, I don't need this anymore. You have to understand it's a lifelong condition. I've heard about 1 in 6 people can go off their antipsychotic and be okay.
Now, before we get to the second question, do you mind if we just do an online one here, Bethany?
Yes.
So the question online that we've received, in your TED Talk, which I've seen, you talk about recovery, and obviously you talked about recovery today. It's a term in your book as well. Recovery is a very nuanced word when it comes to schizophrenia. How do you define recovery?
As I was saying in the beginning, 2 things. 1, be busy with something. It can be school, work, it can be volunteering, it could even be running a household. But you have to find something, hopefully, that you love and be busy. 2, relationships. You know, when I was sleeping outside my last 13 months homeless, I would go for days without seeing anyone. When I got to the hospital, the doctor said, who's your best friend? And I was dumbfounded. I didn't have friends. Today I have wonderful friends in my community church at the university. So 2 things, relationships and meaningful work.
Thank you.
Oh boy, we have questions.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so
Thank you for your interest.
So we want to hear from you. Okay, so let's.
Thank you for being here, ma'am. I'm just wondering if you could see there's a difference between mental health and mental illness, and somehow like the lack of mental health issues, it does transcend into mental illness.
It's a little ambiguous. When I think mental health, I think of a commercial I've been seeing in Cincinnati recently where they talk about social media and how social media is different from real life, and they encourage people to check out a website, like small tips for giving you a better life. That's often associated with mental health. When I hear mental illness, that often makes me think of the need for treatments, often including medication. But when I talk about my schizophrenia, I usually do talk about mental illness. Does that answer your question?
I'm just saying, would it contribute to mental illness? mental health, like for example, people get anxiety, angry, and so forth, could that contribute to mental illness?
Yeah, I mean, anxiety and depression are mental illnesses, and they are physical brain disorders as well. But I usually, with mental health, I often hear tips and ideas for a better life, which is important. But when I hear mental illness, I'm thinking more of like a physical brain problem in need of treatment.
We're going to switch here online. Okay, next question online. Do you have any recommendations for family members who are advocating for their loved ones who are just beginning their journey in caregiving for someone with a serious mental illness?
Find something that your loved one is passionate about. It could be many things. Did they used to love to paint or play football? Or did they want to go to college for, like me, molecular biology? That made a big difference to me when that doctor said, if you stay on these meds, that might be possible. So it's this vision for the future. And the number two, as I said before, make your loved one very aware of the dangers of stopping your med, because you may be doing great, you stop it, you restart it, it doesn't work anymore. Sometimes even at higher dosages, it's not nearly as effective. So people have to understand this is not like an antibiotic trial where you can be on it for 2 weeks and go off of it. So.
Somebody from the floor. Any question from Brenda? Thanks, Marcia.
Perhaps this is going to be a somewhat of a repeat, but of the question that was just asked. My question is, so for family members, and you talked about when people are in like early days of schizophrenia or maybe having a relapse or whatever you would call that condition state, that family members need to connect with their loved one on something that was sort of predated the condition, so a connection there. Are there any other, suggestions that you have for family members for connecting with their loved ones, either in a difficult state or in a survivor state? Because I'm sure even now it's different, might be different too.
Yeah, as I was saying, I didn't understand what the medication did. So, I'm on the risperidone, and I was totally disabled on the risperidone due to side effects, and it didn't work well enough. But when I was on the risperidone, the paranoia, the visual hallucinations, and the delusions were all gone. So I was thinking, I'm not better at all, and my doctors were thinking, oh, she's doing much better, let's send her home. So you need to sit down with your loved one and talk about the medication and talk about improvement, hopefully, that you see on that med. I see this all the time through the Cures Foundation. People are on a medication, they improve a lot, and they have no idea that anything's changed. So that's what I would do. It really all comes down to basic education. Another thing I would say is I used to think these antipsychotics were just sedatives. They just knock you out. I had no idea that I could take an antipsychotic, it would give me clarity and a renewed cognitive ability and enable me to go back to school. So these are the kinds of things I would talk about. Yes.
Yeah. Let's take it from there, and then we'll go online again.
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your relationship with Dr. Nasrallah. First of all, was he your first doctor, and how did that develop and grow? And then was there communication between your doctor and your family?
Dr. Nasrallah was my fourth doctor. So yeah, the first three of them thought that I would have pretty much no life, which is amazing nowadays, that psychiatrists would just give up. Unfortunately, that's so common. I don't know if that happens all the time in Canada. It does all the time in the United States. People are into good enough care. Oh, your loved one's on risperidone. They're not acutely psychotic. Good enough, we're done. Dr. Nasrallah was into baseline. Let's get Bethany as close to her baseline as possible. So that's what really made him different. And your second question was the family involvement?
Yeah, did he communicate with the family?
Yeah, fortunately, pretty early on after my second hospitalization, I invited my family to be part of the program. And, Yeah, Dr. Nasrallah spent a lot of time with me, encouraging me to go back to school and rebuild my life, and my parents would join in on a lot of those conversations. So yeah, I don't know how people get through this without family, quite honestly. My family was wonderful.
Bethany, I just have to point out, look at all these questions from online. You're a popular gal. Next question. What do you wish people around you knew while you were in active psychosis?
I wish they understood that I couldn't control my behavior. You know, if you have Alzheimer's disease, your loved ones don't say, snap out of it, act normal. You know, we understand that with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. A quick story. When I was at UC, I was not disclosing my schizophrenia yet. And I went to a dinner. There was this law student there, and the topic of voices came up. And she said, people with schizophrenia are culpable for their behavior because they hear a voice, and then they can just choose to do what it says or not do what it said. So that was not my experience. Those voices could make me do almost anything. They took over my body. They were the most irritating stimulus I could ever imagine. So I wish that people who saw me screaming back at the voices or living outside understood that this was not a choice I was making, that this was a disease, and that I was in dire need of medical treatment.
Good answer. I agree. Another question from in the room. Jane. Oh, no. Oh, yeah.
This isn't really a question. It's just I found your TED Talk and I read about you. And thank you for being so open about your illness. I've shared it with my son. My son, our son, started clozapine a year ago.
Oh, good.
And it's given me hope, us hope, for his future. And I believe it's given him hope as well. So just
I
thank
hope
you.
so.
Thank you.
Yeah, just the scientist in me, I would make sure he doesn't go off the medication unless directed by a doctor. Yeah, I do hope to be on mine for life. So, but congratulations. Yeah, that's wonderful.
What would you do, Bethany, and suggest if a loved one with schizophrenia refuses medication?
Well, you always try to be a friend. You do. If somebody has schizophrenia, I like taking people out to eat, for example, you know. I like speaking with people one-on-one, spending time with people, showing people love. If the person refusing treatment for schizophrenia is seriously ill and your loved one, at least in the United States, we often highly recommend legal guardianship, you know, to try to get this person treatment that they so badly need. You know, again, as I was saying, you know, involuntary treatment is so misunderstood, and it looks like a violation of human rights. Recently, I was hearing from a church friend. I think he was a social worker, and he used to see this homeless woman all the time struggling on the streets. And then years went by, and he saw her again at an event, and she was smartly dressed and looked very well and was holding it together. And he went up to her and he said, "Oh my gosh, what happened to you? You look great." And she looked at him and she said, "Why? Why did you leave me to suffer on the streets for so much time?" You know, and I see that oftentimes with involuntary hospitalization. People, you know, like me, I didn't want to be hospitalized, right? But then in hindsight, you say, you know, I'm so glad that happened. So yeah, so if you're the loved one, I'm trying to say, if you are a family member of that loved one and appropriate, then I would consider becoming the guardian and checking out your options for involuntary hospitalization. And also just keep in mind the fact that it's much easier to land in jail than it is to get services, and that needs to change.
Next question. So many families are worried about hurting or embarrassing a loved one who is delusional and has psychosis, which can obviously prevent them from getting the help that they need. Do you have any advice for these family members?
Sure. We have a great psychologist in the United States. His name is Javier Amador. Anybody ever heard of him? Yeah. So if you're dealing with a loved one with delusions, his suggestions are really helpful. Just in brief, if your loved one's saying, "I see a big pink elephant," in the room, you don't say, "No, you don't. You're crazy. What are you thinking?" You say, "Oh, how big is the elephant? What is it, rusty pink or is it magenta pink?" You know what I mean? You ask questions and they say, "Oh, do you believe me?" And you might say, "Oh, that's not important. I want to understand what you're seeing." And eventually you admit that you don't see it either. But yeah, he has some really great suggestions for how to gingerly deal with the person without offending them and eventually, come up with ideas for how to seek help.
Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you so much for this presentation today. It's been awesome. I have two questions, but I'll keep it brief and keep it to one. But you mentioned that the psychiatrist you've been working with is the fourth psychiatrist that you've seen, and I think that's really common for folks to kind of go through multiple physicians and psychiatrists in their journeys. And I'm curious if you have any suggestions or tips for people in dealing with medical teams that might underestimate somebody's capabilities and kind of have that attitude that is more good enough than getting to baseline again.
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for this. We need massive change, at least in the United States, because the prevalent belief is not shoot for the baseline, do whatever it takes. The prominent belief is just get good enough. I would say this: if you have a loved one who's seeing a nurse practitioner or doctor, I would recommend a nurse or practitioner or doctor who uses clozapine. I think it is criminal that practicing psychiatrists and nurses don't use clozapine, but many of them don't. So I would see one who prescribes clozapine, and then be your loved one's advocate. Go to the doctor with them if at all possible, and give the doctor your insights. This is what my son or daughter used to love. This is their journey through psychosis. This is what's going right now. This is what they're struggling with now. So be proactive and look for a proactive clinician too.
Promise we'll get to you after. Yep, promise. Next question. And feel free, if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to. Do you experience any side effects on clozapine?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. So I've been sedated by clozapine. I was sleeping 14 hours a night. Even when I started school, I was going to school part-time. Dr. Nasrallah in 2010 added a medication off-label called Provigil, which is actually for the sleep disorder narcolepsy. And that brought me down from 14 hours of sleep to more like 11. And he switched it to armodafinil in 2012. But yeah, it's made me brighter, it's made me less tired, it makes me just feel better. So I take that. And then I don't talk much about my tardive dyskinesia. Anybody familiar with tardive dyskinesia? Yeah, so I developed it in 2012, and in the United States, we have not one but two medications for TD that were approved by the FDA in 2017. And so I take one of those medications. People on clozapine usually do not develop tardive dyskinesia, but I did, and that may be because of medications I took 10 years prior. But I take a medication for that.
Thanks, Bethany. Now, we did have a question from the audience there.
Thank you so much for coming. It was so good, your talk.
Thank you.
So I have a child who's been successfully improving on clozapine for 3 years, and
good.
I did see your talk in your organization right around the time he was started taking it. The only thing, I just wonder if you have any advice. That child smokes a lot of marijuana. You talked about cannabis, because he still has some symptoms, and he believes that the cannabis helps reduce the little baby. Like, he has a few hallucinations, but he knows that they're not real because of the clozapine. but he still has them, and so he's smoking what I think is too much cannabis to reduce that. Do you have any ideas?
Do what you can to try to get him off marijuana. I mean, quite honestly, there's a lot of people out there that are not like me. For me, schizophrenia was in my DNA. This is going to happen. There's a lot of people in our communities who may or may not develop schizophrenia, depending on what their environment is during the course of their lives. And if they smoke cannabis, sometimes it's like a switch has turned on. The hallucinations turn on. But unfortunately, oftentimes that switch will never turn off. The marijuana may be helping him in the short term with some breakthrough symptoms. That is true. But I would strongly suggest that you talk to him and say, let's at least try to get you on the marijuana. I will also put in a plug for anybody considering clozapine. If you go to Cure's website, maybe we could share the link, Resources Podcast. We have a clozapine podcast by Jonathan Meyer, and he talks about titrating clozapine, medications that can be added to clozapine, ECT, and all kinds of information you can use about helping a person successfully be on the best plan for clozapine. So anyway, but yeah, the short answer, try your best to get him to at least limit it as much as he can, and it'll probably really help in the long term.
Thank you.
And one final question from online. You talked about the relationship with your family. What is the relationship with your parents like now?
Yeah, my parents have just been amazing through all of this. I didn't share, but I remember I was at the hospital in LA that March 3rd, 2007, and they asked me if I wanted to speak with my parents, because when I was hospitalized, you know, they call your next of kin. And my mom got on the phone and she said, you know, you're my best friend. She didn't say you were or you could be. She said you are. And she just said, I've missed you. So that's my mom. You know, my parents were wonderful. And then during my 12 months trying the 5 atypical antipsychotics, my first Ohio psychiatrist decided I was too complicated and just dropped me like a hot potato. And we had nowhere to go, and I was having breakthrough symptoms. So my dad took me the only place we knew to go, which was the emergency room. He took me 4 or 5 times, and every time we're waiting hours and hours, and he didn't mind. So my parents, they have been absolutely the best, tried and true supporters and friends. And today, Mom works as Cure's secretary, and Dad's Cure's treasurer, which, yeah, he spends a lot of time on Cures. So I see them about once a week. We live half an hour from each other, and it's been wonderful.
Thank you, Bethany. Thank you for all your questions, and Bethany, you are a glimmer of hope. You're a huge shining light of hope. So thank you so much for being here in Richmond with us here today and sharing your story, for your bravery, for your courage, for your vulnerability, and keep doing what you're doing. So thank you, Bethany. And we have come to the end of our event. I just really want to say thank you again to the team who organized this amazing event, to Marcia, to Vivian, Alex is here, Andrew, Sunita. Thanks to each and every one of you for organizing today's event. It may not be perfect because, of course, I went off script, of course. And to the board members, and once again to the entire team across this province. We are here for you, and so you can be there for the families. So thank you for just being a part of BCSS. And thank you to our board members. And the board members, if you, just a little quick note, if you would like a new updated photo, please see Roselle. Roselle is our photographer, she's right there. And for our new board members, if you'd like a headshot for a website, please see Roselle so we can make sure that we get you added. And for those attending virtually, thank you so much for attending. I know you don't get the same vibe in the room, but I hope you felt included in this event today, so thank you so much for joining virtually. And to you, our family members, we salute you. We salute you for supporting your loved one with schizophrenia. You are not alone on this journey. And BCSS is here to support you every single way we possibly can, whether it be through our education, whether it be through our podcast, whether it be through our one-on-one support, our Strengthening Families Together, our Strengthening Families Together Indigenous, or our family support groups. That's a lot of programs, and that's a lot of ways for us to wrap our arms around you. It takes a lot of courage to reach out. As we said before, if somebody has cancer, we're the first one there. I loved your casserole picture, you know, because we're the first one there to have the balloons and the casseroles. And yet when it comes to serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, we back away. It's time for us to lean in rather than lean out. And I just hope that in this lifetime that we will get there. And like I said, it takes a lot of courage for people to reach out. But please remember, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is a quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. And that's why BCSS is here. We're here to support you each and every day. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of BCSS, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you.